Yeah, I just want to say how excited I am to be here with like-minded people. Bill and I, my husband, have been working on, trying to communicate about digital dependencies for a long time, many years. And when we first started talking about this, because we live in Silicon Valley, and I was like, you're insane. And we were going to everyone in our network, all the venture capitalists we could, and we're saying, look, you got to change the business model. You have to come up with new products. This is a disaster waiting to happen. And they'd say, all right, I think I hear what you're saying, and if you can tell me how I can make money and pitch it to me in 5 minutes, then I'll listen to more. They're just like, oh. So, yeah, that went nowhere. But then we met Tristan Harris, who had been working for even longer than we had in trying to wake Silicon Valley up. And things are really changing. It's scary and it's exciting. So this is a talk about persuasive design. I'm going to go a little bit more into what it is, how it works in this talk. I'm Christelia Benford. I've been studying how messages are designed for a very long time. I first started doing this by studying what's called narrative theory, and I was introduced to that field as an undergraduate. Then I studied it as a grad student. And when I taught literature, I used to tell people it is kind of like teaching defense against the dark arts, because narrative is a form of persuasive design. And in fact, a lot of what is used now in digital technology is inspired by ancient rhetorical techniques. It's just amped up with data and a lot of psychological research. So let's go ahead and get started. So,
will your slide presentation be available?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, it's not you, it's your phone. And a slight title change. A design-based approach to empowering parents and their older children to reduce screen time. And then it's actually not even really your phone. It is persuasive design. And we're going to talk about the difference between the phone, which is itself an instance of persuasive technology, and the things that live on your phone, which are also persuasive technology. So these are the objectives. So we're going to introduce design as a pragmatic reference frame for understanding and transforming screen time habits. So the whole frame of design, and I don't have time to go into the design thinking approach to getting out of this, but that's something we'll kind of talk a little bit about it, but it was cramming the presentation too much. But these things are designed, as Richard Freed was saying, they're designed deliberately to make you keep looking at them. I'm going to talk about the design principles behind Silicon Valley's most habit-forming platforms. We're going to discuss how design literacy and thinking could uncloak charismatic platforms, and this is B.J. Fogg's term, charismatic computers. Charismatic platforms like Facebook, YouTube, as social actors, reach parents and older children who are power users and technophiles. That's how, in Silicon Valley, that's how people talk about it. They're not making addicts, they're making power users. So, support families in establishing limits on screen time, and empower parents and older children to align moment-to-moment use with day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, because that's really what it is that we think to ourselves, I use my phone too much, I don't want to be on my phone all the time. And then you're on your phone all the time. You're like, how did that happen? Like, I just was going to message this person on Facebook, and now it's been an hour. We're going to talk about how that happens. So first, just a few numbers that will be kind of familiar to most people in the room, but it's just nice to all get on the same page. So the average smartphone owner touches their phone display about 2,600 times. That's a lot of touching. 98% of children under 8 live in homes with at least one mobile device. 56% of parents check their mobile devices while driving with children in the car. 17% of Americans think they're on their phone too much. 56% think other people are. And we've seen stats like that, they'll think, I don't do it, it's all these are bringing a lot of discord into the home. About 33% of parents and teens say they argue daily about device use. Hispanic and Latino parents are the most concerned about children's media use. African American parents are most likely to say their children benefit. And that's something I know there's another session that's going to be talking about that. But there's definitely, we used to talk about the digital divide, and we used to be worried about the people who didn't have access. There's widespread, like we've almost got nationwide penetration. Now we need to worry about like how are people really thinking about the benefits and the consequences of having these phones, having these technologies.
And is there a discrepancy in usage? Like those are parents' perceptions of it, but is there a difference? I don't know if you have the data on like children.
There is, but I don't remember the numbers. 87% of smartphone owners are checking their devices while they're talking to family and friends. And, as anyone who has been out to dinner with someone who's got their phone there and always looking at their phone, and it makes socializing kind of miserable. 29% of Americans interact with their phone more than anyone else. 39% of millennials. 72% of teens feel the need to respond immediately to digital messages. Think about how many interruptions that is, like how that ruptures your experience of the day. Just constantly responding to whatever little ping comes in. 50% of teens feel addicted to mobile devices. Now, the language of addiction is becoming something that people are using more and more easily. Now, a lot of people use it jokingly and say like, oh, I'm semi-addicted to my phone. I get it all the time. And then some people use it very seriously. That's something that some of the tech executives who've come out talk about it in Silicon Valley lingo. It's called hooking the user, building habit-forming products. So there's a reason why this language is really prevalent, but I think that it has limited utility value, and that's one of the reasons why I'm proposing that we shift reference frames. And this is why, because we're living in a world where being always on, always available is valorized. It's considered like that's modern, that's the way to show that you really are ambitious, that you really want to be successful. And so there's that message. But then on the other hand, there's this other message that the people who overuse their phones are stigmatized. They have a problem, they're addicts, they're weak-willed, and these things don't line up. And the language of addiction is, it makes it hard for people who want to have serious conversations about how we're using our phones and how it's affecting how we socialize, how we work, how we live at home. It makes it very difficult to have these conversations because people say like, well, I'm not an addict. I'm just using my phone like everyone else. So this is the first little break in this talk, and we're going to have another one later. But I want to just open it up and talk a little bit about frames because we're all here. We are all interested in this issue, and there are a lot of ways to frame digital overuse. So the addiction frame, like I said, is one that is becoming increasingly common. And so the first question is, I'm wondering, how would other people describe the advantages or the disadvantages and the disadvantages of the addiction frame for talking about screen time habits? And just anyone who wants to.
Well, it's something that, so I work with teens, and one of the things that we talked about, like we're working on substance use prevention. And so you can avoid that, and that's okay. But if you're addicted to your phone, everybody around you, there's the expectation that you will have a phone at some point. You know what I mean? Whereas like if you never do drugs again, that's a positive thing.
Right, yeah, the phones are so integrated. It's in them. So you first.
You might be, you might be talking to parents about how the power of these devices and of the games and how addictive they are. But if they then take that language and go to their 15-year-old son in their conversation, it's going to be a total turnoff. Well, I'm not. It just makes the other person defensive.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, being steeped in all of us in the opioid epidemic, to talk about addiction to devices and things, it seems people can see that as trivial in comparison to these harder drugs, even though some of the effects at the lower levels can be quite similar. Nonetheless, it's hard to get that conversation started because it seems trivial.
In general, people who are addicted to anything tend to be in denial about that addiction, so going straight for the labeling of addiction may not help in moving the conversation forward.
So I'm hearing it trivializes other forms of chemical addiction. It can feel off-putting. It can feel irrelevant to whoever you might be talking to. But these are some of the problems with the addiction frame. Are there any other frames that any of you use when you're talking about digital use habits?
Just to explain dopamine and variable reward, I think is a really great way to get away from the word addiction. It is addiction, but it's understandable. Most people can understand that variable reward.
It's one of the reasons why I am proposing the design framework, because the use of conditioning through variable rewards is part of the design, and so it allows us to talk about that, and that usually gets roped into an addiction frame, but it doesn't have to be there. And then we've got, then we can actually talk about the object. The other thing about the design frame, this is something that Bill and I discovered when we first started our research. We would say, well, it's a problem with the internet. The internet is addictive. And people say, like, well, what do you mean by the internet? Do you mean Facebook? Are you talking about Microsoft Word? The thing about the design frame is that it allows us, one, it's kind of, it's agnostic. Persuasive design, it doesn't matter if it's Google, it doesn't matter if it's Facebook, it doesn't matter what it is. If they're using these persuasive design techniques, then that's what I'm talking about. And then you can separate the software from the hardware. And so it allows people who want to reach someone who is very attracted to their device and who feels very technologically savvy. It allows people like us to reach them and not be rejected out of hand for not knowing what the latest whatever is that they're interested in. One of the reasons is because persuasive design is a matter of user experience. And what it's going to open up is a whole way of just talking to people about their actual experience with the software platform and the phone. And you'll see as we continue on. But does anyone want to talk about some other frames that they might?
So one thing that, so one of the people I'd mentioned earlier today about the Truth Campaign about tobacco use and how teens really respond to like being tricked and being taken advantage of. And so I talk to teens a lot about that, like who's benefiting from you being on Snapchat, why is it so important, like that kind of things. But in regards to talking about their experience, I try and talk to them about like how does it feel like when this thing happens? Because oftentimes that like motivational interviewing, which is what they use for a lot of the like sexual health, for substance use prevention, that like is getting to the core of understanding what their values are. Because if I'm saying like Snapchat is not important, it's silly, that's my experience as an old person. But like if I ask them like, well, why do you keep, what is your experience? Kind of like getting back to like user X, I think is what you guys call it in Silicon Valley. UX. Oh, sorry. Like in the UX, then that becomes like about them and like their experience. So it feels more personalized and it's less judgmental, which I think goes a long way.
Yeah. Yes.
I've been doing, in my school district, my coworker and I sort of put it together. It's probably not as great as the information I've been getting here, but we've been meeting with parents that have preschoolers and kindergartners. The amount of, I'm a special ed teacher, the amount of evaluations we get for children with receptive and expressive language delays is just out of this world. But we found when we meet with the parents as parents, because we both have children, and sort of say, did you know, oh my gosh, I just learned this and I want to share it with you, they will share more of the experiences openly of what they see with children in their lives, or that are, and they see it in themselves too, where if you go at it like, you know, more aggressively, or you shouldn't have been doing that, you know, it just, if you identify with them and let them see you as a parent too, and hey, you know, the more you know, the better you do, you know, that kind of attitude.
And I find for me, you know, Bill and I have two and a half kids. 2 kids, 19 and 23, and then a stepson. So but there was a point, like right, I don't know, it was probably like around 2012, where I felt like we were all just like sucked into the world, you know, like we all had our little platforms of choice. But yeah, and it was just starting to think about this stuff that, and I was teaching a class called Technological Visions of Dystopia, and I just started thinking like, what is happening in this world? Like, what is wrong? And just like you were saying, like, just really kind of thinking, you know, what am I doing as a parent? Like, why did we give those kids the smartphones? Like, what were we thinking? So, yeah, I think, you know, when you are a parent, you know, that's one way to relate, but it's also so easy to feel defensive. So easy to feel defensive.
I think one other frame to look at this from is not from the tech frame, but from the child development frame. So what is it that we know is good for kids? Because we have 100 years of child development research and a smattering of research about, you know, children media for the last like 10, 15, or 20 years. So if you start from that, then you're not approaching it from like a deficit problem. This is something we have to overcome. This is a way of looking at it as like what's good for kids and how can we support and include you, as opposed to freaking parents out all the time about this is something that's going awry in your home.
It's true, and you know, yeah, deficit talk is so prevalent right now, and it's one of the ways that I think parents get preyed upon. So yeah, it's nice to have alternatives.
I think one of the things that is useful when we talk to parents about this topic is to help them understand brain development, similarly to what the last gentleman was talking about, but that literally a child becomes the environment that they're engaging with. And how you spend your time becomes who your child is, you know. So it's not so much about the evils as it is about how, you know, how is it that you want your child's brain to develop? What kind of internal structure, neural connections do you want it to make? Something engaged with this environment, or something engaged with an environment that more reflects your values as a parent? I mean, when you go there, like at that deeper level, I think a parent's like, oh, you know, I never thought of it that way before. I need to watch how they spend their time.
Yeah. Any other comments before I move on?
It is helpful to suggest what you can give instead of just talk about taking away, so that there isn't this idea. I mean, obviously the technological media is filling some kind of hole, endless hole. How can you fill that hole in a positive way through human interaction and other experiences? So instead of just taking away, someone was telling me today about a beautiful program where they were getting preschools to take away their screen use, but offered through grant funding to get them raincoats and rain boots for the children so that they'd be more likely to go outside in all weather. Instead of just saying, don't do screens.
Right. Equipping them to be able to
offering a healthier alternative.
Yes.
I think the language is so important, and as you're saying, just 12, back in 2012, we did not even have the terminology here, and we were sort of trying to analyze what was happening and then give it the right language. And so I think for a while we kept labeling things, and so the terminology that I wanted to focus on as I teach this is digital socialization, in order to be able to pinpoint the process rather than just like the iGen or screenagers. And so we give them this label of this is where they as if they came from another planet.
Yes.
And ended up here, and they're like, these kids, how did they, as we were saying, the mediated message was, yes, the kids are different. And so we all took that mediated profit margin message in and believed it. I guess we have a new species of children today. So I like to kind of go through and use the term digital socialization to actually pinpoint the process of how did we get to this place where we are lacking soft skills, where we are having declining verbal skills through development. We have to look at the process and then, as we call it, the upstream approach, go to the prevention part. So, and then utility apps, like your utility app is very different than digital socialization. So your calculator is
Right.
Microsoft Word. And so again, being able to pinpoint and giving the problem the right language so we can address the problem by focusing on the process of the problem.
Yes, yes. And by the end of this talk, what I hope you'll be able to do is to look at all the apps on your phone and determine which ones are what I call PT, persuasive technology, and which ones aren't. And then you can decide if you want to keep it or not. So the other thing that I wanted to say, and you'll see as we get into the talk, persuasive design takes advantage of something that is happening to us, and you see it in the numbers. We don't talk to each other as much. We don't socialize in a just, you and me, leave the phone away kind of way. And so the quality of our connections is very poor, and people are feeling lonely. We are experiencing a loneliness epidemic, and persuasive technology is specifically designed to fill the loneliness gap, and that is the most vicious feedback loop. And that's why one of the solutions to persuasive design and persuasive technology is to socialize more without your phone. And that that is part of, it's not easy, but it's just a little more straightforward than some of the other solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. So now we're going to talk about persuasive technology first, and then we'll talk about the design. So this is BJ Fogg. We got to see a lot of most recently. So here's how Fogg defines persuasive technology. Any interactive computing system designed to change people's attitudes and behaviors. Now, we heard about how one of Fogg's most famous students is a CEO of Instagram. Now, when Instagram was a classroom project at Stanford, it was called Send the Sunshine. And the idea behind it was, because Fogg is actually he speaks very optimistically about persuasive design, and he thinks, it should be used for health, it should be used to promote world peace, it should be used for all these great things. So Send the Sunshine. The idea that the students had was, I can imagine an app where if I get a text from my friend and my friend says, I'm sad over here in this cloudy, Boston, and I'm here in sunny Stanford, I'll take a pretty picture and say, look, here's sunshine, friend, and then they'll be happy, they'll be cheered up. And I read that and I thought, that's just such strange logic, but that is what the students thought. So they, prototyped this, And eventually it became Instagram, and it became, enhanced. The original design became enhanced with more and more persuasive design techniques. And now Instagram, I'm sure some of you know, is owned by Facebook. Now, persuasive technology, your iPhone is persuasive technology, but it lives also on your devices as services and platforms. So, shopping sites and platforms, games, streaming services, and we'll talk a little bit about how they use persuasive design techniques. Even search engines use persuasive design techniques. And I didn't put influtainment, edutainment, those things are also using persuasive design. So I didn't put them there, but they are using it. And social media, which we'll be talking mostly about. So here's some numbers. These are the most popular social media sites, YouTube and Facebook. You know, I don't know if you always hear how young people supposedly don't use Facebook. And you see 18 to 29, 91% of them use YouTube, 81% of them use Facebook. It's not true that they don't use Facebook. It is true that they also use other things. You see 64% using Instagram, 68% using Snapchat, 40% using Twitter. That is a lot of social media. And you see, though, across the board, I mean, even senior citizens who are coming to social media in greater numbers. But YouTube and Facebook, that's where most of us are Americans. That's what we like to use. So here, I circled these because these are, kids and parents, basically. And then we've got younger kids. And I've been hearing at this conference, and I say this all the time, parents are worried about their kids' use, but the parents are using the devices a lot too. And just the number about 54% of parents checking their phones while they're driving the kids in the car. And I picked that number as just representative of a problem. And so that's why it really is about talking to not just the kids, but also the parents, and creating a different sort of atmosphere in the home that's less lonely. Yeah. How does Facebook?
Do you think that the reason why parents are so, they're fighting back on this is because they themselves?
Anecdotally, it seems to me there's a little bit of defensiveness. But then, as the other, the other number, there's several surveys that show the same effect, that, it's hard to see yourself. Like, so you think you're not, you see everybody else doing it, you think you're not as bad off. I don't know, I think that's a lot of it. How does Facebook persuade? Right now, everybody's talking about all the data. So that's one of the ways. And it gets lots and lots of data. So if you think about, these are the social media apps owned by Facebook. Look at the numbers, 18 to 29, 81%, 64%, 27%. And that's not to mention all of the data Facebook gets from the little likes and the logins that we do all over the web. It is taking in all of that data, crunching it. But of course, it's not just about data. It's about persuasive design. So the data allows the persuasive design to be able to update itself in real time as you're using it. The design it's just a series of techniques and strategies. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So this is Anders Koksbo. And he is basically head of the Danish BBC. So persuasive design seeks to document and utilize our cognitive biases and similar insights from psychology into persuasive patterns so that they can be more easily applied to product design. There are a lot of people who have been working on persuasive design. This guy actually has a little deck of cards. it's not just BJ Fogg. It's so lucrative to use this to make apps. It's everywhere, and there are more and more experts in it. I liken it to a tractor beam that is pulling us out of this human 3D context and into the lower entropy world of the internet. And we can be in whatever world we prefer. You know, if we like Facebook, we can be there. If we want to be on YouTube, we can be there. If we want to just endlessly search Google, we can be there. And there are people who do that. That's their preferred thing to do on their phones. Persuasive design draws us into the persuasive technology. Now, metaphor shift. BJ Fogg, in his dissertation, was called charismatic, how to make charismatic computers. That's what he was talking about. You know, and charisma, you know, it's kind of, it's a person, you know, it's a charming person, somebody that you just want to be around all the time. So BJ Fogg has figured out how to do that. Before I go to my next slide, I just want to share a quote from Talkspo again. He says, the danger of persuasive design lies in its power, and the fact that it's taken complex psychological concepts and distilled them into easily digestible bits. And, you know, in the language of operant conditioning, it's designed to elicit target behaviors by leveraging the data plus the design, the research-backed design. So here is BJ Fogg's behavior grid. So this is one very, very efficient way to make a persuasive design. So this grid, if you were a developer and you said, I want to make an app that is going to, say, get someone to increase behavior intensity from now on. So the example that Fogg uses in his article is purchase more local produce. So what you do is he's got a few questions. You ask yourself the questions, helps you locate where you are on the graph. The graph is actually an index to a whole little resource collection. So you get on there, you figure out what sort of generic behavior type, and these actually have names, so I didn't have space, but see here, it's path, this is span for a period of time, this is dot. Then these are green behaviors, do a new behavior. The blue behaviors, do a familiar behavior. Increased behavior intensity is purple. Decreased behavior intensity is gray. Stop an existing behavior is black. So this would be a purple path. So you determine that you want to make an app that will create behavior change of a purple path type. When you go to the resource, then you are able to, it helps you identify the triggers. Are those triggers cyclical? Is it something that just happens automatically because it's Sunday? Or is it something that happens because you get a notification or some other kind of cue trigger? So you figure that out. And then you look at the other behaviors in the category. You, in the resource guide, you'll learn the factors that affect adoption. You will learn techniques and different implementation strategies. You'll get a list of products that have effectively used that technique, that behavior change, and you'll learn the relationships among behavior types. So for instance, if you wanted to design an app that was going to stop an existing behavior, you would probably couldn't start there. You would first have to get the user to decrease intensity, and then you move to the black path. So this is just, I put this up here, not really because you need to memorize it or anything, but the grid just gives you a sense of how methodical this is, how easy they try to make it so that these things can just be developed. I mean, you know, teenagers develop these apps. I mean, and you can kind of see it in the aesthetics of them. Is there a question over here? Okay. Now, this is the key part. This is the easy part to remember. Persuasive technology has 3 phases. And first phase is tool. And a lot of times when we're talking to people about digital dependencies, they say like, oh, you shouldn't be on Facebook too much, it makes people sad and depressed. And the person goes, no, but Facebook allows me to connect with all my friends. It's a tool, social connection, I love it. Persuasive design is meant to have this face. This is the face that we like to talk about. This is the public face. This is the one that venture capitalists talk about when they fund the app. It's got another face. It is a symbolic and sensory medium. And in our research, Bill and I talk about it as a sensory medium. We talk about how when you're online, it is a kind of sensory deprivation. And so we do the numbers on that. But, all digital technology is a symbolic and sensory medium. And I'll talk a little bit about how the tool face and the medium face are manipulated so that the platform becomes more persuasive. But finally, and this is what we're going to be talking about mostly, it has a third face, social actor face. And in a platform like Facebook, that face is practically hidden. But it is meant to, Facebook is meant to make you feel like you're socializing. And it has to hide that face because it wants you to think of all the individual people that you're socializing with. But I'm going to show you some apps that don't, that put the social face front and center. And I think we're going to start to see more of those. In fact, Alexa and Google Home and Siri are examples of persuasive technology where that social face is almost as prevalent as the tool face. So these things go around like that. So, as a tool, and these are some notes that I absolutely will make available, so you don't have to take notes on this, but I just want to kind of go through it. There are just a few techniques, and you will recognize these. I'll use some examples. So as a tool, the first persuasive technique, the most popular one, is called reduction. And that is reducing the target behavior to a simple action to decrease friction. Silicon Valley hates friction. Like all Silicon Valley stuff, you can remove friction. That's great. Reduction. So Amazon's one-click, the most famous example of reduction that there is. But also the auto-queuing on YouTube or Netflix. That's also the technique of reduction. Next one is called tunneling. And you see this most frequently when you're loading your software, and it's saying like, do this step, now do this step, now do this step. And that seems pretty benign. It keeps you from making mistakes. But it can also be used in ways, you can be using an app, and it'll throw you through a tunnel. So for instance, Mint.com, I don't know if any of you have ever used Mint.com, but the onboarding process. It's going to ask you for all this stuff, and it's going to want access to all these things. BJ Fogg talks about how when you're in the tunnel, you're more open to suggestions than when you're outside the tunnel, because you're in the tunnel, and you're just like, well, these are my only choices. I have 3 choices, so I guess I'll pick one. Or if you were outside, or if you could even get outside, you might go, I'm not going to give you that information. I don't want to give it to you. Tailoring. Tailoring, also very, very common. That is Netflix saying, hey, these are for you. And Amazon saying, people who purchase that like this. Suggestion. This one comes from rhetoric. The ancient Greek term is kairos. It's the idea of making a suggestion at the right time. And, Facebook has been accused of serving ads when they think people are vulnerable. That's an example of Kairos. The Uber platform has been outed as knowing when their drivers are getting close to their daily goals. So Uber allows them to say like, oh, I want to make $200 by the end of the day before I stop driving. So the platform used to say, oh, you're almost close to $200 and keep driving. And the reason they wanted them to keep driving is because if more Uber drivers are on the road, the better it is for Uber. The problem with that, and it had other ways of keeping the drivers on the road, but it was working so well that the drivers were driving past, they were too tired, they were wrecking, and they had to change that feature. The Uber drivers, there's a New York Times article about it, they were quoted, because this is basically video game, it's mostly used in video games. And they were saying, it feels like you're in a video game, I feel like I can't stop, I just have to drive and drive and drive. It's awful. Self-monitoring. So your Apple Watch is an example of persuasive technology. The idea that you say, oh, like my watch is telling me how many steps I took. And now, because you're looking, you say, I haven't reached my 10,000 steps. Well, maybe I'll park my car really far away. So now the Apple Watch has subtly persuaded you to do something that you might not have done otherwise. It's a benign, fairly benign use. Surveillance. Now, as persuasive technology, surveillance only works when it's overt. Of course, persuasive technology is always, watching you covertly. But when it's overt, that's when it can persuade you. And an example is an app called EverDrive, which is something that parents use to monitor how their teenagers drive. But the thing about EverDrive is that unlike some of the other apps where it's a secret, like the kid doesn't know that the parents are monitoring, EverDrive, both parents and kids have an app and it's gamified. And the idea is whoever drives the best wins. And so now they compete on good driving. But that's an example of the overt surveillance technique at work. And then finally, conditioning, which is the variable rewards. Intermittently offering the rewards of the tribe, the rewards of the hunt, and the rewards of the self. That when these variable rewards are being used, it's usually because the PT is pretending to offer us access to community, or it's pretending to help us on some quest that it's probably invented for us, or it's pretending to give us self-knowledge. And maybe it is, but oftentimes it isn't really. So that's the face as a tool. As a sensory and symbolic medium, it's pretty straightforward, that it's a simulated environment that we can go into. And now as a social actor. So as a social actor, persuasive technology is kind of like people. And in fact, the research on persuasive technology was based on what makes people seem credible. So it turns out that attractive people are presumed to be credible. So that's why your iPhone is so pretty. The attractiveness is part of why we want it, we like it. That's why we touch it so much. Similarity is another thing. Like if you are often more persuaded by someone who seems similar to you. So persuasive technology, especially if it's text-based and it's anchored toward young people, it'll try to use their lingo and seem like it's like them. Praise, and we heard about that. Reciprocity, authority, that it will act like an authority figure. And I'm going to, what happens next is you'll see these in action. So this is the famous Mac video. We're not gonna look at it, but this is just the idea of attractiveness. So you remember Justin Long representing a Mac and John Hodgman representing a PC. And in this video, the Mac is saying like, oh, I just made a movie. And then it's one of the supermodels comes up and she represents a movie made on a Mac. And then some, portly man in a dress comes up and represents the movie made on the PC. And that commercial is playing with this idea of, we like the things that are more attractive. We think they're better. We think, we're more ready to be persuaded by them. So, persuasive social actors. So these are social actors. So technology acting like a social actor. They are designed to adopt a social role, a particular social role. A friend, a doctor, a teammate, even an opponent, a teacher, a pet. Remember the Tamagotchi?
Oh, yeah.
That's like early example of persuasive technology, or a guide. They do this by orchestrating a whole variety of social cues. So you've got the social dynamics. So the PT will pretend to take turns with you. It'll cooperate, it'll praise, it'll answer your questions. It'll put peer pressure on you. It'll use group polarization and social comparison. Language, the interactive language, it's better when they speak. It's got to sound friendly but also authoritative at the same time. It'll use psychological social cues. Preferences, humor, personality, feeling, empathy, physical. And this is in robotics, where you see this. Or sometimes in just some sort of little avatars in some persuasive technology, but face, eye, body shape, and movement. So these are the ways that it is trying to suggest to us that it's a person, that it's got some kind of social presence, that it can compensate for the loneliness that we might be feeling. So here is an example of persuasive technology. It's a cute little documentary filmmaker named Boxy. Notice how small Boxy is. There's Boxy. We're going to see Boxy's film. It's very short. So so before I go to the film, as you can see there on the slide, this is called portable persuasive technology, and I think I have Boxy here because I think we're moving to that. And in fact, toys like Hello Barbie, or the horrible Aristotle thing that thankfully went away, those are examples of portable persuasive technology. So Boxy was programmed with what they called a story capture goal. Persuasive technology always has a goal. So the target behavior for Boxy was to make people tell its secrets, talk to it, do what it asked, so that it could make its documentary about MIT. So this is in the language of the designers. Boxy is designed to leverage humans to attain its goal by looking and sounding like a child. So it was programmed, was physically designed to look cute, and it was programmed to seem helpless. So one of the ways that it was programmed to seem helpless is, say it's walking or rolling around, and it would get in a corner. Now, these things can be designed. If you ever looked at Roomba, it can be designed just to I'm in a corner, and then leave the corner. But not Boxy. Boxy was designed to go in the corner and then kind of shake a little, and then raise itself up a little, and just look kind of scared and make little noises. And so people would come up and they go, oh, pick it up, and then it would start talking. And, and it would ask to be put down or taken up the stairs or whatever. One of the things the designers found is that people were very polarized in their reaction to Boxy. They either thought it was super cute and they liked it and they were really gentle and they did what it said, or they were aggressive toward it and treated it very badly. And the way they know that is because Boxy had an accelerometer, so they could tell people were like, but let's see Boxy now.
Hello, I'm being interviewed by a robot.
I'm going to ask you some questions. Who do you love most in the world?
My mom.
I love my mom.
My wife.
What will people remember you for?
A little bit crazy, freaky, generous, small.
Tell me something that you never told a stranger before.
I'm not really Chinese.
I had plastic surgery.
I just saw a dead cat wrapped in a blanket. I did. Do you want to see it? Dead cat in a blanket. No one likes it.
grandma, what would you regret the most?
Spending time worrying.
Not loving the people I've loved fully.
What regret is?
Taking advantage of the college scholarship that I got.
What is art?
Sometimes I think art is an elaborate game that creative people play with rich people's money.
A form of expression.
It's about making fun of everyday things.
Am I art?
Yeah, you're a little artwork, man. You're a little cool, little robotic artwork. I don't like the robots, though. You guys can check out the world one day, I think.
So that is boxing. Now, going more into the future, this is an image from some researchers at Disney, and they've designed a neural net that can do the work that focus groups used to have to do. So you make a movie, you have a focus group, and then they go, that ending sucks, and they make the new ending. Well, now this thing can watch the audience, and it has an extreme accuracy rate. Based on looking at the faces, it can tell how the audience as a whole is going to like the movie just by watching the first few minutes of the movie. And I think part of this has to do with how formulaic Disney movies are. The point is, this kind of facial recognition. Now, and it's not just Disney who's doing this. There is a Boston-based gaming company called, I'm going to mispronounce it if I don't look, yes. Affectiva. Yes, and it is also using this kind of data capture and along with haptic. So I don't have my phone, but if you are like playing a game and it's getting too hard, you don't start pressing on it more, you'll just hold it in a different way and they can tell. And so then the game will become easier, or it might say like, hey, why don't you play this other game? So these things are on the way. So we've already got some very potent persuasive technology, but it is going to get more potent unless we do something. So what does persuasive technology want? Engagement. It's trying to build a relationship with you and then get you to engage. And usually these are the target behaviors. It wants you to log on, it wants you to stay, it wants you to click, it wants you to like or heart or whatever the version is on that, to pin things, to swipe, to share, to post, to join, to comment, to subscribe, to message, and of course, to buy. These are the target behaviors. It might have some other target behaviors like Boxy does, but these are usually the most popular ones. In plain English, I don't know if those little Z's got there. So, as a tool, persuasive technology has the power to do what humans and other media cannot. That's one of the reasons we think like, it's so cool, it's so awesome. As a medium, it has the power to stand in for the world. And the reason it works as a social actor is because it has the power to be perceived as a life form. So I want to go ahead and open it to general discussion, but you see these are some questions, but we can talk about those. We're just going to move through, but this is basically why computers can be more persuasive than humans. They use multiple influence modalities with algorithmic precision. They never get tired, very persistent. They can offer, or as we know, only seem to offer anonymity. They can go where humans can't. They manage tremendous volumes of data, and they scale. This is where you see persuasive technology. Its new thing is acting as medical authority. The field is called digiceuticals, and The Economist estimates that by 2025, this industry will be about a $9 billion industry. What that means, basically, is that there are PTs that are being designed to treat these things. And right now, the FDA is, different companies are petitioning the FDA to have their PTs approved to be prescribed. One example is a little app called Onward, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but here you can see some persuasive design techniques in action. So Onward's AI is called O. You see O talking to the user, giving instructions. The user says, okay, got it. And then O says, remember to check in with me daily, and if you need help, just launch the app, and I'll be there for you 24/7. And this is textbook PT stuff. Here it is, like offering self-monitoring. Seems great. It actually is supposed to work, be very effective. But the problem is that this is the usual solution for Silicon Valley. Problem, you got a problem with tech? Here's tech to solve it. And so we're still stuck in the same place where we're not empowered. Because at the end of the day, that's what PT does, is it's taking away our power of choice, it's manipulating us, and we're not as autonomous as we could be. So yes. Before I open it up, I just want to say, back to that first slide, remembering how much we touch our phones, and I think about how little we touch each other, and how much information we can communicate to each other, even just a simple like pat on the arm when someone's feeling sad. We are not using this very potent communication channel, and our phones are getting all of that, and it's horrible. But like I said, they are designed to do that. It's not us, it's the phone. UX, user experience, which is the big umbrella under which persuasive design, it's about emotion. It's about having technology that's got some sort of functionality and usability, but for the UX designer as opposed to the UI designer, user interface, UX designer wants to know, how does this thing make you feel? And that's how these technologies are getting more and more powerful. So I think because persuasive design is so codified, it's so easy to identify, I think it's possible to be able to put pressure on tech companies to say, like, you cannot use these design techniques on anything that's marketed toward children. But I don't know, maybe that's like utopian, but that's what I hope. And I would like to turn the floor over to Susan to open up the discussion.
Thank you. Wow, Chrissy, thank you so much for thank you for doing such a great job at making something that is pretty complicated be actually understandable. I really appreciate that a lot. I went to a conference that Affectiva put on about emotion and AI. That's what it was called, emotion and artificial intelligence. And what I kept hearing there is, emotion is the new economy. It's not just attention, it's emotion. Emotion is the new economy. We have to monetize emotion. Yeah. And they demonstrated, their capacity to read facial expressions. It's just astonishing, and accurately. So, my concerns are always go back to young children and to families of young children, and I have a couple of responses, including confusion about what's the best way to help parents of young children allow their kids a more screen-free life, or a screen-free life. Because it seems to me that one of the best ways to be able to resist persuasive intent is to have an investment in the ineffable splendors of the rest of the world. And that what's scary for children is not only are they encountering persuasive design, they are encountering persuasive design with brains that are just developing, and so the persuasion is embedded in the actual architecture of their brain, and that's That's very, very, very troubling to me. And so when you were talking about, addiction and how do we talk about addiction without talking about addiction, I'm wondering for parents of young children, if I understand for older kids and for adults that you don't want to do that for all the reasons that you say, but for parents of babies and toddlers, I don't know if one of the arguments is, you know, your kids are going to be more dependent on this, it's going to change their brain. If we could use the addiction word with them, and if that would, I don't know the answer to this. Would it turn them off? Or would it be scary enough to, this information, would it be scary enough to really make them want to provide experiences in the analog world and to limit their children's access to technology? So for the early childhood people here, I'm interested in that question. Or not.
I'm not an early childhood person, but I would love to respond. I totally hear would that be scary enough? I actually think that is really scary. Maybe it's too scary, right? Because you don't want to think about you have your 2-year-old and it's your kid, you're giving this to your child and then they're gonna be addicted, they're gonna be an addict. That's a terrifying image versus even the way you said it before mentioning addiction, which is just this changes the architecture of the brain, seems like a more neutral way to approach it that doesn't have the sort of social stigmas and fears of addiction attached to it, but that is just very straightforward. This is a developmental physical change that doesn't activate those defenses.
I think I'm a marketing professional and I work in professional services actually. We talk a lot about the workplace of the future and the skills, and I think, also a parent of a 4-year-old, it's highly competitive, right? You want your kid to have that advantage. And when I think in terms of visuals and messaging, people like Bill and Chrissy, just amazingly brilliant thinkers. And if you think of all the people who invented tech, what were they doing as kids? They were absolutely not on devices. And I think it's dispelling some myths for parents because, everyone thinks that the fact that a kid has an iPad, not everyone obviously, but, this is going to somehow give your child an advantage. So I think we have to work against those fallacies.
Sophia, and then Adrian.
I'm not only about early childhood, but I've been going back and going to childbirth classes and teaching. And these parents are all having their first baby in 6 weeks or something. They're there as couples, and they're there for the whole weekend. This is in Oregon. And it's really because I was so concerned about how initial attachment is going to be interfered with by parents' cell phone use, even though they may not mean it to happen, right?
All the studies are on that.
Yes,
right?
and so I have been. It's very fascinating, to talk to these parents. They know nothing, but to actually give them a parenting class about what's about to happen and why it's so important that they actually think about their own cell phone use as well as all these other issues and what really makes a healthy environment, a healthy, balanced environment for these little kids who are about to come their way. It's very interesting, and I tried to get them to role play just that feeling of being thugged, by somebody. But where one's the baby and one's the parent, and the parent won't look up because the parent's always looking at the cell phone, what does that feel like if a ding from a cell phone? What does that feel like to a tiny child? If that's apparently more important to the parent than actually attending to the child. It's fascinating to work with them, and it's totally worth a try, right? I think they need something kind of dramatic, to understand what's coming up and their responsibility.
Adrian and Jill.
I have an 11-year-old, 4 kids, 11 through 5, and
I think one of the things that I think about, because we are trying to back up from technology and screens, is that I'm actually giving my kids an advantage by limiting screens.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's the message, is that screens can be used supplementally, but that's not what's going to give your kids the advantage. What's going to give your kids the advantage is teaching them all these really important life skills and values that you get through human interaction, not through interaction with the device.
Yeah. You have to make it about the edge, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but that will get through to people.
Yeah, toward goals.
I think
Chelsea, and then.
I think the fear approach works with a small portion of parents that will then be like, okay, no technology, and then the rest of parents feel kind of alienated and shamed, and then they don't engage at all. And that's been my experience of working with parents, and also, but I think what you said about the brain, I think that's where you can get everyone, and this is how the brain develops, and as a parent, this is your beautiful gift to support your child in growing their brain, and they can all get behind that. And then make the decisions that they're going to make, but at least they're doing it consciously instead of the fear. Yeah.
This drives me nuts. I'm in public school. That's not the message they're getting from educators. That is not the message they're getting from educators. You know, at my school, we just got done giving a presentation to parents about, limiting screen time with their kids and yada, yada, yada. The next speaker from the same district came in and gave all the parents, brought in Chromebooks and showed them how to get on all these educational websites for their preschoolers. And I thought I was going to lose it. I was like, what are we doing as a district? We're sending mixed messages. We're saying, use it because parents think technology, I think most people think technology, if they have a computer in the home or their child has some kind of device, that it's making them smarter. And it's perpetuated in the school systems. I mean, when I left Monday, they just shipped in all these new whiteboards and computer carts. And my principal was walking around on Sunshine. He's like, look at what we got. Every grade is going to have their own computer box. They'll have all these laptops at their disposal.
Do you think that parents would respond to the information that we just got from Chrissy? I mean, there is this, this industry with all of the resources in the world coming after your child and wanting your child to love his or her device more than they love you. I mean, is that a message?
Yeah, that's
for parents of young children.
Especially that slide that said computers can be more persuasive than humans, and all the. I was like, I'm gonna get that tattooed on my arm.
and then Jonas.
Well, two things. I do think it does help for them to see kind of the frankly sinister planning behind some of this. I know that, I think it was your book, Susan, I read years ago. Did you kind of go undercover to a conference? That's the book, okay. Well, I brought that to the parents that I work with, and they were amazed that there were paid psychologists and psychiatrists whose job it was to manipulate children through these industries they didn't know. And when they did know, they were more open to hearing more about it. So I do think that kind of information of how manipulated they're being, it's not just about being, with the times or not with the times, it's do you realize how manipulated you and your children are being? And people really do kind of lean forward and want to hear more about that. And then I just wanted to say, even this idea of it's about brain development and about being smarter, I just feel is hollow because it's about human development and being more human. And are the smarter people more valuable than the less smart people? I mean, there's just so much in that idea that I feel like, again, going back to the idea of this hole that can't be filled. It can't be filled with information and being smarter either. You have to really be helping parents want to give their children the kind of childhood that makes them feel whole from within, so that it's not about just being better or smarter than other people, because that's just an endless cycle in itself as well.
It's something that Bill and I talk about in our paper, that there are things about this human 3D context that just, they cannot be replicated. We have to learn in this context. There's so much just information processing. It can only be learned through practice. And when we're in the low entropy environments of digital technology, we don't learn how to do that, and then you lose the capability. I mean, it can be taught, but it's hard work after you've missed like the critical period.
Yeah. Just a quick note to the how we help give kids advantages or not, and we spoke a little bit about this in an earlier session. I think that attainment of, whether it's of things, knowledge, information, right, is important to people. I think particularly if you're a low-income, family who is not going to, you can cut your kids off media all you want. You know there are other advantages that have nothing to do with screens that you are going to be able to provide for them. That a low-income family who may only have access to the world in that way that they work really hard to attain, as gross as we think that it is, that's the way they believe that's going to happen, right? And who are we to say that that's not a way to level the playing field, right? Who are we not to talk about the myriad other ways that folks are being manipulated? And I do think, to Susan's question, I do think people respond to you're being taken. I think people do respond to like, do you really, really understand? And can you connect with somebody is just trying to take you for your hard-earned money, for your time, what little you may have as a working parent, right? And all the ways that's not like, do it, don't do it, that's your prerogative and your choice, but understand that's where, for me, the media literacy piece sometimes is the message that can cut through a little bit, some of that a little bit better. It's not the don't do, it is some of the what to add, it is some of the, how to approach it, right? Because people don't like being told what not to do, especially if out of the next breath we're going to say, and if you don't, you're starting way behind. You might catch up a little bit, but not that way. So what way? Right? I don't think it's this way either, but so what way? How am I going to catch up to your kid?
And this is one of the reasons why I think design literacy is so important, more important than media literacy, which I think can get very medium dependent and siloed, and we can't see the connections, how the media are the same, and we don't really understand how they're different. I think there's a lot of confusion right now. A lot of people say, the novel or television, it's just another medium, and people were upset about it. But it is not like it, not like it at all, for the reasons that we've gone through. But design literacy is deeper than media literacy, and that's one of the reasons why I would like to see that taught instead of media literacy.
So I just want to flag it, so it's 4:15, so
Okay.
this session is officially over, but it's not running, there's no other sessions coming in. The reception is starting upstairs any moment. So if folks want to stay and continue this conversation, you're very welcome to. We can continue it after reception. I just wanted to flag the time.
Thank you.
One quick thing. So I've been watching the professionals that are here at this conference for years. I've brought you into my classroom through your documentaries that I've watched you in, through your research, and and I think we're all here today because we're just getting so frustrated that the problem is moving so fast, and education moves so very slow. And we show up here and we're like, come on, we gotta do something. And one of the things that I was thinking about, what I worked on my little organization for, is the cool factor. Is, for my marketing people here, what I was finding is the second something becomes cool, it's to set a trend might be the way to go. And so I always tell my college students, I'm like, everybody wants to be you. The 18 to 24-year-olds, if you're 50, you want to be them. If you're 12, you want to be them. So my approach has been to really empower this young, cool group with the knowledge that hey, we're being manipulated, and that once they're really empowered and they go through the experience of understanding how powerful authentically connecting is, they become crazy zealots. They literally become the ones that are out there telling their friends. And so my company's called No App for Life. And I'm starting to see like the young kids are getting pissed off that they're being used. So maybe there are ways that I think the fastest way to change is a trend. I don't know how to do it yet, but we have marketing people. And I always tell my students, the second talking becomes cooler than texting, you have just changed the world.
It's true. Absolutely.